Hey, it's Xinfonia again. Today we'll be going over everything Dan Heng PT related. He's a really solid preservation unit, probably the best one right now, so all the more it's important to make the best use of his kit and build him properly since we're getting him for free. So firstly, I'm going to be starting with explaining the kit, but it's actually quite straightforward. Dan Heng PT can give an ally a summon, Soul Dragon, and designates that one character as the bondmate. Giving an ally a summon allows your main DPS to make full use of Sunday's damage boost. This is especially important because Sunday is very meta relevant right now. The only way to designate a bondmate is through his skill or technique, which is his skill. So this works kinda like Saber. And when your ally is a bondmate, they get 15% of Dan Heng PT's attack, and when this bondmate uses any attack, the Soul Dragon will advance his action by 15% and regenerate 6 energy for Dan Heng. The Soul Dragon initially has 165 speed, so you can act quite a few times if your bondmate can attack very frequently, meaning better synergy with units like Anaxa or E2 Phainon. When taking its turn, the Soul Dragon provides a shield for the entire team based on Dan Heng's attack, just like his skill and ultimate. The other interesting part to the Soul Dragon is that during Dan Heng's ultimate, the Soul Dragon now additionally performs a follow-up attack, and a portion of it is based on the bondmate's attack. This way, Dan Heng can actually deal decent damage without having to build crit or damage boost, whatever, since it's based on the bondmate stats, who is most likely going to be your main DPS, so you can deal a few 100,000 damage on average. And that's pretty much the entire kit. It's pretty simple but very strong. The only weird downside I noticed is that there are times the dragon gets stuck behind your DPS, so it's just advancing its action at 0 action value, and you can lose out on a few actions from the Soul Dragon. Unfortunately, no real way around this other than to use your ultimate before your DPS starts the turn, but if you don't have your ult, then it's just gonna be blocked for a while. So anyways, very quickly for trace priority, ultimate is the most important because it gives you extra additional damage from the bondmate, as well as shields, followed by his skill and talent, and finally, you don't need to level his basic attack at all. For Relic Stats, it's usually going to be attack, speed, attack, ERR. This is the go-to build for almost every team. If you are zero cycling with Phainon, for example, then you can maybe run quadruple attack percent because he gets an action advance at the start of battle and doesn't need a second turn or ultimate, but can be kinda rare. Speed isn't actually very important to the Soul Dragon taking actions because it's based on the bondmate's attacks, but extra speed allows Dan Heng to regenerate more skill points, and this is what allows some of the teams to deal massive damage because the skill points can go to someone else like RMC or Saridra. Energy regen rope almost never changes. You want that additional damage from the bondmate, and that can only happen with Dan Heng's ultimate. Like I said, the only time you can drop ERR is if you are zero cycling, you don't get the second ultimate, or if you have Dan Heng E2 because it gives you 4 enhanced Soul Dragon actions instead of 2, so you don't really need ERR anymore to have 100% uptime on the additional damage. Substats are pretty simple. Dan Heng just wants attack and speed. The Soul Dragon can dispel debuffs, so effect resistance isn't as important, but can still be kinda useful because there's nothing else to build anyway. For Relic Sets, it's quite obviously the new self Enshrouded Recluse. It gives extra shield effect and 15% crit damage for the team if you have a shield for extra damage. If you are still farming, 2+2 attack is also acceptable, or if you have random relics just lying around, it's only about 2% worse than the best in slot, so you can use that as a transitional build. For 2-piece Phainon ornaments, you only really have 3 options. You have Lushaka, Broken Kill, and Penacony. Lushaka is best in slot, but both Broken Kill and Penacony are really close behind. It's just that Broken Kill requires 30% effect rest, and Penacony only works for physical units like Phainon, so you might as well be using Lushaka. So far, still quite straightforward, but for light cones, it can look a little bit overwhelming. Basically, Preservation doesn't really have any light cone that has attack percent other than his signature, so most of the light cones are used more so for their base attack rather than the passive. The only other light cone that provides a decent damage boost or has some kind of synergy is the new Battle Pass light cone, Journey Forever Peaceful, because it gives you 20% damage if you have a shield. The rest of the light cones are all really close to one another, sitting at roughly 90% as compared to his signature, and his free-to-play options are decent as well. We are Wildfire actually performing the best despite the bad passive because its base attack is 476 on the higher end. Texture of Memories is slightly lower at 423, and finally followed by Destiny's Threads for Woven as the third best completely free-to-play light cone. But if you have Moment of Victory, that's probably the best choice for free-to-play players, especially in a DOT team with Hydidance and Kafka, because the effective rate helps Dan Heng to get the attack boost from Kafka's Trace. Trend of the universal market can also be sort of decent for DOT and also for E2 Acheron teams with Sunday. S1 is still obviously the best, but most of the value from the cone isn't actually more damage. It's more focused on keeping your team alive because of the healing when he uses his ultimate, which is why the sustained per action value is the highest, and for other teams like with Anaxa or Feixiao can go up even higher because this is calculated with Phainon. It does also give a 24% damage boost or 36% if you have a summon, so the Bondmaid, after using his ultimate, and is why it's the best light cone in terms of damage, but that's also partly due to the high base attack and 64% attack. Team building isn't super hard either, it's just that there are a lot of teams he can slot into. Basically any DPS that scales off attack and likes shields will do fine with Dan Heng PT. Bonus points if they use Sunday. The best synergies I found were actually Anaxa and Saber teams. Basically what happens is that because Dan Heng is so skill point positive, you allow Saridra to use her skill more often, meaning more charges and hence more Anaxa skills. Because Anaxa gets more attacks, this means more energy for Dan Heng, more action advance for the Soul Dragon, so it ties in really nicely and can actually compete with a sustainers team with Robin. However, this is also because Robin can't get her second ultimate on the second wave, because she is quite RNG reliant, but if she is able to get that second ultimate, she will obviously massively outperform Dan Heng, because Anaxa would then get more attacks than the Dan Heng team, on top of dealing more damage per attack. A similar thing happens with Saber. Previously we would use 3B or Ho-Ho, and replacing them with Dan Heng allows RMC to spam their skill, meaning more mem supports, and combining that with Saber's very quick energy regen, Saber and RMC just feed off each other and get like a million turns. This one was calculated with lots of hits from enemies though, which is why the DPAV looks really high at 60k. But for specifically this case, the important thing to focus on is the difference, not the raw number. It's a massive 20k difference at this level. In scenarios where you don't get hit as much, the difference will definitely drop, but it's still going to be quite significant going from Ho-Ho to Dan Heng PT. For Phainon, Dan Heng team still don't do the most damage. Even at E0S1, he still places below Runmei, Bronya and RMC, but he does offer a lot more shielding, and at S1 the damage loss isn't actually too significant, about 4000 DPAV. So for harder content like Anomaly, Arbitration, Dan Heng PT will definitely be the go-to 4th slot for Phainon teams. Finally, we have Feixiao. Funnily enough, our Feixiao hypercarry team now performs the best, better than most versions of the dual carry team with Aventurine or Dan Heng. Feixiao doesn't lose that many stacks because she gains 1 for free if she doesn't use her second full-up attack, and the Soul Dragon has full-up attacks as well. Combined with Sunday, the increase in damage for Feixiao's attack outweigh the damage loss from running Topaz. Honestly though, this one might be a case of power creep, and Topaz is just kinda old and in need of a buff. And by the way, this is why I rate Dan Heng really highly for sustains. He's just performing really well both in-game and theoretically. He's probably the second best sustain in the game right now behind Hyacine. But if Hyacine didn't have Evernight and Castoris, Dan Heng would probably have been the best sustain in the game since he's so incredibly flexible and versatile. Of course, it's slightly harder to zero cycle and things like that, but he doesn't lose that much damage while still being able to keep your team alive, so he might even be a triple tier 0. Overall, he helps the team deal more damage than previous sustains because he is also better at keeping a team alive with very little resources, because the shields can be automatically refreshed with the Soul Dragon, and you can use the skill points for other things like for your DPS or supports. Anyways, other than these teams, I also mentioned Hysidance and Kafka, they can work as well. Jingyuan and Iglia are also decent, it's just that they already have a summon, so Jingyuan and Iglia already have the 50% damage boost from Sunday, so the damage isn't going to be as good as the teams previously. They should still work fine, but especially for Iglia, the energy is really important, so I always prefer running Tingyun or RMC. And like I said, all the other units that skill off attack are fine as well, maybe even Archer or Sele if you want to run and sustain, but of course, a sustainers team will always do better there. I've been getting a few questions for vertical investment, so let's go over his Eidolons now. E1 regenerates 1 skill point when Dan Heng uses his ultimate, and also gives the Bondmaid 18% rest span for 3 turns. Very good Eidolon in general. More skill points will mean more damage, and rest span is a very valuable stat. E2, like I said, increases the enhanced Soul Dragon actions from 2 to 4, and when he uses his ultimate, the Soul Dragon will immediately action advance by 100%. But the other reason why it does more damage is because the additional damage from the Bondmaid doubles, while also providing double the shield effect from the Soul Dragon's enhanced actions, so slightly more damage and more shielding. E4 just reduces the damage taken by the Bondmaid by 20%, this only applies to one ally, so it's a pretty bad Eidolon in my opinion, especially since it doesn't give more damage. E6 does give more damage though, 20% vulnerability, 12% defense ignore, and Dan Heng's ultimate now also has the additional damage from the bondmate at 330% to all enemies. This is by far the best Eidolon and the biggest jump in damage for Dan Heng, but investments like E2 Phainon will already give you more damage than this, which is why I recommend investing into your main DPS and supports first, like Phainon E2 or 3B E1, Saridra E1, so on and so on, and then you can look to Dan Heng's E1 followed by his S1. E1 gives you more damage while S1 is better at keeping your team alive and healthy, so honestly if you already have too much damage like, I don't know, E6 Phainon or something, S1 is not really a bad choice either, especially for very hard game modes like Anomaly Arbitration. Someone asked me about E2 S0 versus E1 S1 as well. E2 S0 with the better pass light cone performs better than E1 S1, but it's pretty close, so I only recommend E2 S0 if you can get that better pass light cone. That's pretty much it for my Dan Heng guide. I have memberships open now if you want to better support what I do, but of course just liking and subscribing already helps the channel a lot, and I appreciate that. But anyways, thanks for watching and see you.